The call came at 2 a.m., jolting me awake from an already restless sleep. Victoria's name flashed across my screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. After all, my stepmother hadn't bothered to contact me since the day she'd effectively stolen my inheritance 3 years ago. "Emily, we need to talk." Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. "Your father's company is in trouble. Major trouble." I sat up in bed, my heart pounding despite my best efforts to remain calm. "That's not my problem anymore, Victoria. You made sure of that." "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Everything's falling apart. The board is threatening to vote me out, and there are rumors of an SEC investigation. I need your help." My name is Emily Chen, and 3 years ago, my father's death changed everything. James Chen had built Chen Technologies from the ground up, turning it into one of the most successful tech companies in Silicon Valley. He was brilliant, driven, and despite his busy schedule, he always made time for me. That is, until Victoria came into our lives. She was 20 years younger than my father, with perfect blonde hair and an MBA from Stanford. I was 25 when they married, already working as a software engineer at a competing firm. I tried to be happy for him, to ignore the way Victoria seemed to insert herself into every aspect of our lives, slowly driving a wedge between us. "Your father works too hard," she'd say, canceling our weekly dinner plans. "He needs to rest." Or, "Emily, dear, wouldn't you be happier at Chen Technologies? Your father could use your help." But I knew what she really meant. She wanted me under her thumb, where she could control everything. When my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, everything happened so fast. Victoria took charge of his care, limiting my visits, claiming he needed rest. In his final weeks, I barely saw him. The day he died, I wasn't even there. Victoria said he'd been sleeping, that she didn't want to disturb him. By the time I arrived at the hospital, it was too late. The will reading was a shock. My father had always told me I would inherit his controlling share of Chen Technologies. "This company will be yours someday," he'd say, his eyes twinkling. "You have the mind for it, the drive." But somehow, the will had been changed. Victoria got everything: the house, the cars, and most importantly, 51% of the company's shares. All I received was a key to an old storage unit and a letter I was instructed not to open until the right time. "You must be disappointed," Victoria had said afterward, her perfectly painted lips curved into a smile. "But your father changed his mind near the end. He worried you weren't ready for the responsibility." Her words cut deep, but not as deep as the memory of my father's promises. I tried to contest the will, but Victoria had covered her bases. There were witnesses to my father's changes, all conveniently people loyal to her. The lawyer said it would be a lengthy, expensive battle with no guarantee of success. So I walked away, taking only the key and my father's letter. Now, 3 years later, Victoria was calling me for help. I'd built a new life for myself, founding my own small but successful software company. I'd moved on, or at least I thought I had. "The company needs you, Emily," Victoria continued, her voice growing desperate. "You know the systems, the code. Your father always said you were the only one who truly understood his vision." I felt a bitter laugh bubble up. "Now you want my help? After everything you did?" "I know you're angry," she said, "but this is bigger than us. The company your father built is at stake. Thousands of jobs could be lost." I closed my eyes, thinking of the storage key sitting in my desk drawer, untouched for 3 years. Next to it, my father's letter remained sealed, waiting for the right time he'd mentioned in his will. "I'll think about it," I said finally, then hung up before she could respond. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the key and letter. Something about Victoria's panic didn't add up. She was too controlled, too careful to let things spiral out of control. Unless... I picked up the key, running my fingers over its worn surface. In 3 years, I'd never visited the storage unit. At first, it hurt too much, then it just seemed pointless. But now, with Victoria's desperate call, I wondered if I'd missed something. The storage facility was on the outskirts of town, a sprawling complex of identical orange doors. Unit 256 was at the back, away from the main office. My hands shook slightly as I inserted the key. The door creaked open, revealing a space smaller than I expected. A single filing cabinet stood against the wall, and beside it, a dusty computer tower I recognized from my father's home office. He'd replaced it months before his death, claiming it was outdated. But my father never threw away technology. Everything has its purpose, he'd always say. I dragged the tower out, my heart racing. This had to be what my father wanted me to find. But why? And why was Victoria calling now? After all this time? Setting the tower on my desk at home, I connected it to a monitor. The system booted up slowly, revealing a login screen I knew well. My father had always used the same password, my mother's birthday combined with mine. The desktop appeared, looking exactly as I remembered. But there was a new folder labeled simply Emily. Inside, I found hundreds of files, emails, financial records, and surveillance photos. My hands began to shake as I read. This wasn't just evidence of Victoria's manipulation. This was proof of something much bigger, something that could explain her sudden panic. My father had known something was wrong, had been gathering evidence, but he'd run out of time. I picked up his letter, finally breaking the seal. The right time, it seemed, had arrived. My dearest Emily, my father's letter began, his familiar handwriting bringing tears to my eyes. If you're reading this, then you finally found what I left for you in the storage unit. I'm sorry for all the secrecy, but I needed to protect you, and the truth. I settled back in my chair, the computer humming quietly beside me as I read on. Victoria isn't who she claims to be. When I discovered her true intentions, it was too late. She had already gained too much control, had too many people in her pocket. But I couldn't let her win entirely. Everything you need is on that computer. The password to decrypt the hidden partition is the date we went camping at Lake Tahoe, the trip where you caught your first fish. My hands trembled as I typed in the date, 6,211,998. A new window opened, revealing another set of folders. What I found inside made my blood run cold. Victoria wasn't just manipulating my father's will. She was part of a sophisticated corporate espionage scheme. The company's recent troubles weren't an accident, they were carefully orchestrated. Victoria and her real partners had been systematically stealing proprietary technology, selling it to competitors while weakening Chen Technologies from within. My phone buzzed again. Victoria calling for the third time today. I let it go to voicemail, my mind racing as I dug deeper into the files. The surveillance photos showed her meeting with known corporate raiders, executives from rival companies. There were offshore account numbers, encrypted emails, everything needed to prove she was betraying not just my father's trust, but the entire company. But my father's letter wasn't finished. I know you're probably angry with me, wondering why I let her take control if I knew about all this. The truth is, I needed her to think she'd won. The only way to expose the entire operation was to let her and her partners believe they had succeeded. In the basement safe at the house, the one behind the Monet in my study, there's a final piece of evidence they don't know exists. A recording of Victoria admitting everything to one of her partners. The safe combination is your mother's birthday, but backwards. I sat back stunned. The house, my childhood home, was now Victoria's. Getting to that safe wouldn't be easy, but I knew I had to try. Just then, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Chen, this is Marcus Wright from the SEC. We need to talk about Chen Technologies. It's urgent. The next 48 hours were a blur. I met with Marcus Wright, a serious-looking man with kind eyes, in a quiet coffee shop downtown. He explained that the SEC had been investigating Chen Technologies for months, but they were missing crucial pieces of evidence to prove the fraud. We know something's wrong, he said, stirring his coffee absently, but whoever's behind this is good at covering their tracks. We need more if we're going to stop them. I thought about the files on the computer, the recording allegedly hidden in my father's safe. What if I could help you get that evidence? Marcus leaned forward, interested. We're listening. That evening, I received another call from Victoria. This time, I answered. Emily, thank God, she breathed. Things are worse than I thought. The board is meeting tomorrow. Please, we need to talk. Come to the house tonight, for your father's sake. I closed my eyes, thinking of the safe behind the Monet, of everything my father had discovered. Okay, I said finally, I'll be there at 8. Victoria was waiting when I arrived, perfect as always in her designer dress and pearls. The house looked exactly as I remembered, down to the Monet hanging in my father's study. She led me there, pouring us both a glass of wine. Emily, I know we've had our differences, she began, perching on the edge of my father's desk. But your father built something incredible here. We can't let it fall apart. I took a sip of wine, buying time. What exactly do you need from me? She launched into an explanation about system vulnerabilities, security protocols that needed updating. As she talked, I couldn't help but notice how her eyes kept darting to the money. Did she know about the safe? About what my father had hidden there? I'll need access to my father's private servers, I said carefully, and his office at the company. If I'm going to help, I need full access. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. Whatever you need. When can you start? Tomorrow, I said. After the board meeting. She nodded, relief visible on her face. Perfect. I'll have everything arranged. As she walked me to the door, I caught a glimpse of movement in the garden. Someone in the shadows, watching. One of Victoria's partners. Or someone else. Back home, I called Marcus. I'm in, I said. But we need to move fast. Tomorrow night, after the board meeting. Are you sure about this? He asked. It could be dangerous. These people have a lot to lose. I thought about my father, about everything he'd sacrificed to expose the truth. I'm sure. It's time to finish what my father started. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept going through the files on the computer, piecing together the extent of Victoria's betrayal. The scheme went deeper than I'd imagined, involving not just corporate espionage but money laundering, fraud, and manipulation at the highest levels of the company. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. New information. Be careful tomorrow. These partners getting nervous. I looked out my window at the city lights, thinking about how everything would change in the next 24 hours. Victoria thought she had won, that she'd successfully pushed me out of my father's life and legacy. She had no idea that he'd been 10 steps ahead of her the whole time. Tomorrow at the board meeting, everything would come to a head. Victoria's carefully constructed world was about to crumble, and I would be there to watch it fall. The board meeting was set for 10 a.m. at Chen Technologies headquarters. I arrived early, watching from my car as board members filed into the gleaming glass building. Victoria's Tesla pulled up at 9:45. And I noticed her hands shaking slightly as she gathered her papers from the passenger seat. Marcus and his team were already in position. Remember, he'd said during our final briefing, we need her to admit to everything. The recording from the safe would be ideal, but a live confession would be even better. I straightened my blazer and grabbed my laptop bag, which contained copies of everything I'd found on my father's computer. As I walked through the lobby, familiar faces turned to stare. I hadn't set foot in this building since my father's death. Emily? Victoria's assistant gasped when I stepped off the elevator. Mrs. Chen didn't mention you'd be attending. Last-minute addition, I said smoothly, heading for the boardroom. Victoria was already there, standing at the head of the long table. She froze when she saw me. Emily, what are you doing here? The meeting doesn't start for 15 minutes. I set my laptop down, maintaining eye contact. I thought we should talk first. About what's really going on with the company. Her perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. I told you yesterday the systems need. Stop lying, Victoria. I opened my laptop, turning it to face her. I know everything. About the technology theft, the offshore accounts, your real partners. Did you really think my father wouldn't figure it out? The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. These accusations are ridiculous. Are they? I pulled up an email chain showing her correspondence with Chen Technologies' biggest competitor. What about this? Or the surveillance photos? Or should we discuss the recording in my father's safe? She moved faster than I expected, reaching for my laptop, but I was quicker. Don't bother. It's all backed up, and the SEC has copies of everything. The SEC. Her voice rose slightly. You're bluffing. You have nothing. Just then, the boardroom doors opened. Board members began filing in, followed by Marcus and 2 other SEC agents. Victoria's eyes darted between them and me, realization dawning. Good morning, everyone, I said clearly. Before we begin, there are some matters we need to discuss regarding the current management of Chen Technologies. Over the next hour, I laid out everything. The corporate espionage, the systematic theft of company secrets, the manipulation of my father's will. Victoria tried to interrupt several times, but the evidence was overwhelming. This is absurd, she finally exploded. You think you can just walk in here with some fabricated evidence and take what's mine? I earned this company, Your father was a fool who couldn't see what was right in front of him. He thought his precious daughter should inherit everything. But I made sure that wouldn't happen. The room fell silent. Marcus stepped forward, holding up his badge. Mrs. Chen, would you like to clarify that last statement? Victoria's face went ash white as she realized what she'd done. I didn't mean. I think you did, I said quietly. Just like you meant to steal company secrets. Just like you meant to change my father's will. He knew, Victoria. He knew everything. The next few hours passed in a blur of SEC interviews, police statements, and shocked board members trying to process what had happened. Victoria was led out in handcuffs, her perfect composure finally shattered. Marcus found me later in my father's old office, staring out at the city skyline. You did good, he said. Your father would be proud. I touched the framed photo on the desk, my father and me at my college graduation. He was always proud. I just wish. He knew what he was doing, Marcus said gently. By letting Victoria think she'd won, he protected you and made sure she'd be caught. That's what parents do. They protect their children. The board called an emergency meeting that afternoon. With Victoria's shares frozen pending criminal investigation, control of the company reverted to the next largest shareholder, me. My father's real will, the one Victoria had hidden, was found in a safe behind the Monet, along with the recording that proved her guilt. Standing in the boardroom that evening, addressing the shell-shocked employees via video conference, I felt my father's presence strongly. Chen Technologies was built on innovation, integrity, and trust, I told them. Those values didn't leave with my father, and they won't be destroyed by one person's greed. Together, we're going to rebuild and make this company stronger than ever. Later that night, I sat in my father's study, my study now, reading the last page of his letter. Emily, my brilliant girl, if you're reading this, you've done it. You've discovered the truth and protected what we built. I'm sorry for letting you think, even for a moment, that I didn't believe in you. Everything I did was to keep you safe until the time was right. The company is yours now, as it always should have been. Lead with integrity, trust your instincts, and remember, I am so proud of you. I wiped away tears, looking around the room that held so many memories. Victoria had tried to erase my father's legacy, to take everything he built, but in the end, his faith in me had proven stronger than her greed. My phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. First round of indictments coming tomorrow. More arrests expected. You holding up okay? I smiled, thinking about the long road ahead. The company would need time to recover, employees would need reassurance, and there would be plenty of cleanup to do. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. I'm good, I texted back. Just getting started. Reaching into my desk drawer, I pulled out a small frame. A newspaper clipping my father had saved from when I won my first coding competition at age 12. The future of tech, the headline read. I hung it next to his photo, a reminder of where I'd come from and where I was going. Victoria had thought she could steal my inheritance, but she'd never understood what my father had really left me, his wisdom, his integrity, and the strength to stand up for what was right. In the end, that was worth more than any company's shares or material wealth. As I locked up the office that night, I caught my reflection in the window, my father's determined expression looking back at me. Chen Technologies was back in the family, where it belonged, and this time, I would make sure it stayed that way. The next morning, as I walked into the building that now truly belonged to me, employees stopped to watch. Some smiled, others looked nervous, but all of them knew things were about to change at Chen Technologies, and I was ready to lead that change, just as my father had always known I would.